Officer down! I repeat, officer down!
Welcome back to 1033. This is your host, Nathan Kapler, a podcast created for a first responder by a first responder. If you are not a first responder, you still are welcome. This podcast is aimed directly at trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is complex and often misunderstood. Our brave men and women who serve our communities often end up with behavioral and psychological issues as a result of experienced trauma from their careers. My goal is to share what I know, my personal experience with PTSD as a retired police officer, and continue to advocate for mental health while providing support to those still in their careers. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical help, and I strongly suggest if you are in fact suffering, you seek out professional medical advice. Please join me on this episode as I continue to expose the reality of PTSD challenges. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Welcome back to 1033. Today I have a very interesting guest for us today. He runs his own podcast show, Uptalk Podcast, Sean Conohan. He's a host over there, and he has been doing this for many years. This man is also waging war with PTSD and getting the story out. It is so important to share our story. So, Sean, I wanted to welcome you to the show. You come to us from Bedford, Nova Scotia. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, brother. It's my pleasure. Totally my pleasure. An honor.
When we first were talking about your story, and I was like, how does your story begin? Yeah. And you started to tell me about your past experience with everything you've done as far as service and sacrifice, and your commitment to the community is completely honoring and honorable. I don't know if I'm saying that the right way, but I want to say thank you for your service and for your sacrifice. You come to us with 17 years of paramedic experience, 16 years of being a dispatcher, and also well over a decade of doing firefighter work as well.
Yeah, I was a sucker for punishment. There's no doubt, right? Started out with volunteer. That was the gateway. The gateway drug to everything first responder is the volunteer fire department. So at like 18, my good friend growing up was a volunteer firefighter, and later would be an EMT. That's now a primary care paramedic. But he was in the fire department, so of course I joined when I could, and loved it. Loved it right away. At the time, I was at Acadia University, taking recreation management. That's what I wanted to do. But after, some time in the fire department, I realized, you know what? I love this. I want to do this. So I stopped going to Acadia University, and I applied to Holland College in Charlottetown, PEI, Prince Edward Island, and went there to get my what was then EMT, emergency medical technician, which is now known as primary care paramedic. That's sort of how it all started.
So many questions even come from this space because it's like a timestamp of your life of you getting into the work, right? Into doing the first responder work. Let's dial it back a little bit more. What was life like for you as a younger man? And if you want to go back to the childhood stuff, I mean, as well, by all means, like what did that world look like for you?
I mean, looking back now, there were certainly some precursors or some signs that, I may have trouble later, or maybe predisposed to some trouble later. So, my childhood was chaotic. My parents, loved me very much. However, because of issues with money, they were both working multiple jobs, bouncing from job to job sometimes. They weren't home very much. So from very young age, like from, 8, maybe, there were many days I would come home from school. Nobody would be home. I'd learn to make myself a meal or to, feed myself, and they may be home after I go to bed, or sometimes, or maybe not. And that's just the way it had to be. That's just the work that they had. Right. And I didn't begrudge them of that. It was just, looking back, I could see how it was kind of lonely. Kind kind of being that way, and a lot of chaos, right? There'd be many months where we'd have to be wondering whether we had a place to live or not next month. Many instances like that. Um, you know, and when I look back on it, I know they did their best. And again, I don't begrudge them anything, but it was chaotic, and it led to, again, a lot of loneliness. I was like a chubby kid with like crazy bushy eyebrows that was adequately or averagely athletic, right? I played a lot of different sports, but never played any one so well as to make it on the high school team or anything like that. I was like popular adjacent, I call it, in high school, in that I was friends with the popular kids, and my best friend, who I mentioned was a firefighter and EMT, is still a paramedic. He was very popular, so I hung out with him, and because I hung out with him, then I would hang out with the popular kids if he brought me along. So popular adjacent, I call it. But which led to a lot of nights at home, evenings at home, so my parents aren't there. I'm eating whatever, watching TV, and a lot of loneliness. And that's probably when depression started, I would say, looking back. Probably some depression there, a lot of sadness, and, a lot of maybe not taking, then, led to the habits of not taking care of myself properly, the way I should be, physically and mentally, emotionally. But then because, like a lot of us, you may relate, because I'm broken, quote unquote, broken in a way, I then go out and want to I want to fix other people, or I want to help other people in their worst days, because I can't fix myself, because I have no idea what's going on with myself. So I'll learn some skills to be able to help other people, whether it be in the fire service, then as a paramedic, or as a dispatcher, if that makes sense.
It really does. In order to, I mean, there's a special kind of person that eventually ends up serving the community in that role, right? Where they are willing to go to the depths of helping people at their worst moments. And for a lot of people, they're very caring, compassionate, but they also have some of that, like you said, predisposed perspective of the world where they understand the pain.
Yeah. Yeah, and we just don't want to, because, well, for me, I'll speak for myself, but I believe, like you said, I think this is a common thread. Because I knew how painful it was, how sad I would get, and just what that felt like, I didn't want anybody else to have that, if I could help
Absolutely.
it. So, yeah, I mean, it led to all of that.
Yeah. Thank you for being so honest and vulnerable even here. I mean, this is something that for me, I think I've had to really look internally to ask because I always told myself, I was like, oh, I'm compassionate. I wanted to serve my community and make the world a better place. Right. But when you really boil down and really start to look at your own childhood trauma and what shaped your childhood, you start to really kind of gain a different insight into maybe why you chose to get into policing, firefighter, paramedic, whatever the case is. And it's not to paint that we're throwing a pity party for ourselves right now. It's just to say that, hey, we're much more aware now as a man, or if you come on the show and you have this conversation as a woman, right? As to why you chose what you did, because there's a difference between conscious thought and subconscious thought as to how you get to where you are today. So you painted a really good picture of your childhood. Now, obviously, for a lot of men that are listening, they're probably going to hear this, and it's really going to touch them in a way where they say, "Oh my God, this is my story too." How were you able to work through some of the guilt or the shame that maybe came from the childhood in order to get ready to serve the community?
Oh, I didn't. That was the thing. I just didn't deal with it at all. I think, and that's probably most of everybody's story. I didn't get, to me, going into firefighting and then paramedicine, obviously we talked about the reasons why I went into it initially, But it also is a way to bury yourself in work and not have to deal with any of your own stuff ever. Right? So for the first, you know, the first 10 years, like probably maybe even smaller than that, you know, that's what it was. Like my stuff didn't really start to become a problem until way later when everything built up. And I just didn't have the skills because I didn't take care of myself before I became a first responder. That led to me not being able to process when things got really bad. I didn't have the skills because I'd never taken care of myself before. So why would I all of a sudden, boom, have the skills to get through this now?
Did you ever get to a place where your perspective shifted into more of a gratitude acceptance phase with your childhood where you finally looked at it and said, okay, you know what? I don't have anyone to blame for what I went through, including myself, right? And start to maybe recognize that you actually weren't given those tools. It's not that you didn't know how to do it. It's that you were never provided, which is a very different thing.
It's a huge different thing. If you've never seen a soccer ball before, and I throw it at you and say, go play soccer, like, it's not that you don't want to play soccer or that you don't want to have fun or that you don't have, basic physical skills to do it. It's that you have no idea what this thing is or what this game is or how to play it. It's a much different thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it perfectly. And I'm glad you were able to work through that, because I know as a lot of people are listening, they're probably going to catch on that you're talking about how, you weren't able to care for yourself, or you weren't able to get through the sadness or maybe some of the depression. And those are very hard moments in our lives, but in the healing journey, I think we eventually get to a place where we recognize that we didn't stand a chance, and it's entirely okay that we couldn't work through the depression or we couldn't care for ourselves because we were never really shown how to do it in the first place, right? We were never even really given a soccer ball per se.
No, we weren't. And that's the thing. Like, I look back now, my childhood was what it was. Everybody has a childhood story. Everybody's childhood has some traumatic parts in it. And as we all know, trauma is relative. So it's relative to the person. Trauma to that person, their worst day of their life may not look like your worst day of your life, but it felt the same to them because that it's relative. It's a, you know, it's hard to get around. It's a mind fuck if I call it that. It's a it's a hard thing to get your head around, that it doesn't matter. It's not a competition. There's no gold medal for trauma, no trauma Olympics. Like, everybody's trauma feels the same to them as yours did to you. And once you know that and you realize that's your story, and obviously I gained lots of other skills. I gained lots of other survivor type skills that I've had to use from time to time, from having, been on my own really when I was really young, taking care of myself, learned some skills. And I may not have had all of the wonderful, awesome, fantastic memories that I have if I didn't have that upbringing. Everything could have been different. So I'm grateful for it. Um, and these are just the skills these are the tools that I didn't get. and everybody has tools they didn't get. Mine just happened to be these emotional processing, being emotionally present, wellness tools that I just didn't have until I absolutely had to have them and had to learn them yesterday. Right?
Your journey as you take off from a young man into high school and then start to figure out, okay, what is it that I want to do? When did you join up with first responder type of work? In your 20s?
No, before that I was 18, so I was still in high school. So I had the awesome, and people who know will know, I had the awesome experience of being in high school with my fire pager on, and my fire pager goes off because there's a fire. I leave. I wave to my teacher. I walk out of my classroom, get in my car, and go to the fire. Like, it was awesome. Not gonna lie, it was cool. And I say that it's not nearly as aggressive as it sounds. My teachers were fully compliant. They all supported the fire department. But it was cool just to get up and go. I'm needed, right? So yeah, so that was awesome.
Was there a shift there for you now where I guess maybe feeling that you were needed?
Yeah, I wanted to be needed. I wanted to be probably noticed, or I wanted some attention. Let's be honest. Wasn't getting any attention at home. Nobody's fault, as I said. But probably just really starving for attention or to be special, quote unquote special, or doing a special thing that not a lot of people do. There certainly had to be connections as to why I gravitated towards that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm not going to say yes or no. I mean, this is your story, your journey, right? But yeah, as you were talking about it, I kind of just thought, oh, okay, very interesting. There's definitely a theme here of, okay, now you're needed, and now you have this privilege of being able to walk away from life and being treated a little bit special in a sense to, everybody's okay with Sean going out and fighting the fire. He's a bit of a hero, right? Kind of cool. So, I mean, this probably started to blend into maybe a shift from the depression, the sadness to, I don't know if there's an ego that's building or if there is something that's growing within that you like, but what does this next phase look like for you?
I don't know if it's an ego in the way that we see ego. I was never egotistical about it, if I may say that, but there is an ego that grows because, I mean, first responders, we never would tell other people. We're not going to go up to other people and say, hey, the hero is here. We don't think of ourselves as heroes. I don't think of myself as a hero. Never did. However, when you find yourself not being able to do this work anymore, and now you're on the outside of that bubble looking in, you do feel that loss of the fact that you were somebody, quote unquote, special, or that you were part of a special team that went out and helped people in their worst day. You know what I mean? Like, you don't think of yourself as a hero, but there are certainly heroic connections or a sense of pride in the fact that you are doing something as part of a special team that not a lot of people can do or would want to do. Does that make sense?
I miss the people the most, the family, the connection, right? And that's very much when we finally find our place in life where we love those people, that family, maybe the connection that we were always longing for that happens in first responder work. You're right. When you walk away from it, you really feel that loss.
Like, I'm not special anymore because our identity, for me, my identity was the uniform. And that's when I was most comfortable. When I was most comfortable and most accomplished and, the best version of me for many years, unfortunately, was when I was in my uniform. And I say unfortunately because I got used to that. And the best version of you, you have a best work version of you. But unfortunately, if you make that the only version of you, then you are not, there's a really big part of your life waiting for you after your shift that's waiting at home that wants or needs to see the best life version of you that never comes out. And we were mentioning this. So, you go through firefighter school, paramedic school, whatever it may be. They hammer into you the need to disconnect from your emotions before you start your shift. And to stay disconnected, stay compassionate, but disconnect your emotions in order to get through your shift and in order to see the things that you see. Totally valid. It really is the only way you can do it and do it well and for a long time. I believe that. However, what they do not teach you is the fact that you also have to reconnect with your emotions after your shift on the way home. It has to be a deliberate reconnection of work Sean is done, and life Sean, or home, or dad, or your husband or wife, like, you need to reconnect with those emotions, because the way that you treat your patients with compassion, but with emotional distance, um, and being stoic and all that kind of thing, does not work. It will not work in your home life. It will not go over well. Um, it will cause a lot of trouble. And it's that reconnection that we're not taught, that we need to be taught, and need to gain that skill of being able to reconnect with your emotions after every shift.
I wholeheartedly agree with you as well, Sean. And I don't know if it's something that is possible, because if you take yourself and put yourself into a position where you're a first responder for, I don't know, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever the case is, how do you reconnect your emotions on a 15-minute drive on the way home and then shift back into, okay, I'm here now. I'm a husband. I'm a boyfriend. I have, all of these responsibilities, these emotional responsibilities at home. Very difficult. Very, very difficult. Now, for you, this obviously is something that you understand very, very well. But I'd love to go back to, we don't have to talk specifically about the trauma per se that led to the post-traumatic stress, but let's talk about kind of some of the things that you may have noticed about you as, before trauma, and then during, and then after, and that big shift that happens up and leading to the moment where you get diagnosed with PTSD.
Yeah, no, I'll take you through all of it. That's fine. Like, when I started my paramedic career, all through my early fire career, went fine. Went great, killing it, no issues. Transitioned, got educated, got transitioned into a paramedic career, got hired as a full-time paramedic in Nova Scotia. Killing it, loving it, good at it. This is great. Like, life is awesome. Then got into the dispatch center, loved it even more. Was extremely good at it. Held various various leadership positions within the dispatch center. Was really good. And honestly, I thought I was killing it. I thought I was awesome at it. I was so happy because I wanted to find a place where I was doing good work for the people. I seemed to be really good at it. I'll just do this. I'll do this till I retire. Like, this is so great, right? Like, this was awesome. That's what I thought. And alongside of that, in my home life, thought I was killing it. Best dad, best husband, best brother, friend. Thought it was awesome. Um, and then later in my career, probably the last few years of my career, things started to get a little bit tough. As in, I never used to bring calls home with me. Like, I would have a call, whether it be at the dispatch center or on the ambulance. The call would be over, and I would forget about it. It was done, and I move on to the next one. But what started to happen was I would be thinking about these patients or this call at home, to the point where it was bothering me and I wasn't sleeping well. But I still didn't talk to anybody about it. It was like, okay, this will pass. I can deal with this. I can get through this, like we all tell ourselves. But then it started to get worse, and I started to have a series of calls through like a 6 or 8 month period. I had numerous calls that involved kids. And the last one that I say was the straw that broke the camel's back for me was a call involving a child, and the child was a very similar age to my daughter. And that call hit me like a truck, like no other call. And it was actually as a dispatcher this happened. I took the call from 911, and it hit me like a truck. As soon as I hung up the phone, I started to cry, which I would never do at work, ever. Even outside of work, I would hardly ever cry. Just probably another symptom of always stuffing your emotions in a box and never letting them show, right? So immediately started to cry, had to leave the room. A coworker came out to check on me. I went home that day. Was only allowed to take a couple days off before having to go in for my last night shift. I should have just not gone in, but I went in, and then for a few months after that, tried to still say things were okay, and that I can do this. And then in March of 2014, basically I had to make the decision that my career as a paramedic and as a dispatcher was over. It was through a series of meetings with my employer, with management, and at the time I was a union president as well. I was our union president. So, and I was a very good one, and I was kind of a thorn in the side to management, rightfully so. And over these last few months where I was starting to have some issues, there have been small issues that didn't affect patient care with me at work, and they were sort of piling some paper on me as well. So I finally had a meeting in February of 2014, and that's when I stopped the meeting, and I said, look, I have to tell you something. I'm having trouble from this last call. They knew what I was talking about. I don't know if I can do this anymore. It may be leading to these mistakes. I just need some help. So that meeting was over. That was okay. We'll see what we can do. We'll get back to you. And then in March 2014, I was called back for another meeting with management, and that's when they terminated me. They didn't offer any help. They terminated my employment. My benefits were gone as of that second. And they had, the paperwork to do this. Like, they didn't have to make that choice, but they did, and they chose not to help me. So from that moment, I'm left with nothing. My identity is gone. My income is gone. And I don't know what to do. That was the low point, if that makes sense.
It really does.
So from there, it was, here's the thing. Here's my motivations. I need to find a way to make money for the family. I have to provide for my family. So immediately started re-educating myself without getting, I maybe should have got some long-term help, maybe some inpatient stuff or some outpatient programs to get my brain back on track or get my head back where it should be and to get into some wellness routines. But no, I had to provide for the family. So immediately went to re-educate myself, went back to school, became a heavy equipment operator. Something totally different than what this was, what my life prior to was, on purpose. I knew that I'd often joked about with friends that if I couldn't work as a paramedic anymore, all I wanted to do was drive a big dump truck and a big sandbox, and I'm fine all day. So I went and got my heavy equipment operator certificate and started going through jobs, doing that. And it was going from job to job because a lot of them weren't permanent. They were casual or contractor jobs and since 2014 up until recently, that's what I've been doing, is just stringing together jobs as that, just trying to keep providing for my family. And of course, through this, as I said, I had no benefits from March 2014. So I didn't have the money to go find a culturally competent psychologist to work on my issues. So what I chose to do, because I was always a fan of podcasts and liked listening to them to and from work. So I said, you know what? I'll just start a podcast. I will teach myself how to do this, because then I can have leading psychologists and peers and, whoever else wants to tell their story. I can have them on the podcast, talk to them for a couple hours for free. I'm not paying them anything. And I can learn everything that I can from them to try to educate myself so I can figure out what the hell is going on.
You have an amazing story, Sean.
No, it's just how it happened for me. So I started doing that, and then I got hooked up with a group which is now the Tema Foundation, which is one of my sponsors for my podcast. And it was because of them and a partnership through a partnership with Wounded Warriors Canada that there used to be a program called the Peer and Family Support Fund. It was something like that. And it provided $1,000 for your therapy. So all of a sudden, like, I applied to this, and then my psychologist called me and said, "Hey, I have a check here for $1,000. We can start therapy." I was like, "Oh my God, like, that's amazing." And that's why I've been loyal to, the Tema Foundation ever since, because they had a part in saving my life. So I got this money for a psychologist, Dr. Robin McGee, who people who have listened to Uptalk from the beginning will know her. She had a little segment on my podcast in the first season, and she's awesome. She's wicked. I was able to go through therapy, do EMDR therapy, so eye movement desensitization, and the R I always forget, but I did that. That's what I did, and it worked. It helped me reprocess those memories from a traumatic memory to a narrative memory, so I could just talk about them and wouldn't have the physical symptoms pop up about them. That worked. But what was left behind, as you mentioned, is the and guilt and shame of, after you start to get your head back on straight and you start to remember things. You remember I told you that I thought I was killing it and that I was so good at what I did here, at work and at home. Then you start to realize that wasn't true at all. You're actually a horrible husband. Really, really bad to be around. Not a very good dad. Not nice to be around because you were never present. You thought you were, like I thought I was, but I wasn't. There are big events. My wife would tell me afterwards about some events, big, huge family events that I was at, that my wife will mention and I have no recollection of, zero memory of, which makes me feel really bad. And it's really sad to say, but it happens. It's, the horrible part of PTSD is this. Because what happens with PTSD is that your brain fails to process some traumatic memories the way that it should. And they build up. And your amygdala, right in the back of your brain, which is what fires up when it needs to, when you need to survive, when there's a threat, it fires up. So it starts firing all the time, saying that you have a threat. And this is your fight or flight, the whole fight or flight thing. This is where it comes from in your brain. So that's firing all the time. The unfortunate part of that is that when the amygdala fires, the prefrontal cortex shuts down. And, coincidentally, your prefrontal cortex is in charge of communication, logic, reason, has some memory function. All these things get shut down. So when we wonder why we can't communicate right, or we can't make good decisions or have good judgment when we're reacting out of a stress environment, that's why. That part of your brain is shut off. It's just not possible for you to access it, right? So it's once you learn that, it's a truly biological thing, okay? And then it becomes easier to sort of swallow as to what's going on. So when you know that is what's happening, you need to figure out a way to tell your amygdala to relax, because there's no threat. And you do that by your wellness routines. That's what I've had to have, that's what I've had to learn. I've had to learn from my guests, which I've had awesome guests teach me all these things, is that breath work. I do a little breath exercise many times a day just to make sure I'm grounded and not in threat mode, so that I'm communicating properly. Breath work, yoga, meditation, float therapy is awesome. It can be anything. It can be anything that allows you to relax and makes you feel grounded. And that's going to be different for everybody. And that's the trick, is to do that regularly so that your amygdala calms the fuck down so that your prefrontal cortex can stay online, which allows you to be, okay to be around.
You've covered a lot of ground. I don't really know where to start, but I'll start here because as we were kind of getting to this point, you talked a lot about obviously the loss of the career and the lack of support that happened to you. And personally speaking, when we receive a lack of support when we're going through PTSD and we're going through trauma, it makes all of the issues worse, right? Much like the boy that had this issue, you now have this issue as an adult, you have the sanctuary trauma. And my belief from connecting with people has given me this perspective that it actually is, one, it's damaging, and it actually completely halts any attempt or ability to possibly heal or recover in that moment. Where employers can do things so much differently is if they've gotten to a point where you no longer can be a part of the employment picture, that's fine. But give you the support so that you can go on and heal yourself outside, give you the access to the psychologists, give you the funding that you need. You deserve it. You've put your time in those shoes to help them. They should be helping you on the way out to transition out. For me to hear that you didn't receive any support at all breaks my heart. And I am in complete shock that you are here as a man, healed, and you've made it through all of this on your own. So I'm completely gripped with an immense amount of emotion right now, Sean. Even just myself, like just pure gratitude that you're still here. Because I know there was probably an element of suicide in your story where life was no longer fun, right? And yeah, the fact that you've made it through the storm on your own, it just breaks my heart to hear that people still go through this stuff. It shouldn't go this way at all.
No, it shouldn't. And for years that bothered me a lot. That lack of support, like that was like a thorn. It made me bitter, and I had to let go of it. I knew that at some point I had to let go of that in order to have any post-traumatic growth or healing. So here's what I did. There's an annual charity golf tournament here in Halifax, and I would go to it as Uptalk podcast. I know the guy that runs it, just to to promote it and to support it. And also my employer would be involved as well, of course, sending, people to golf that day. And of course, one of the people that always came to golf was the one person that I attributed this whole thing to, of the reason why I wasn't given support, was for me embodied in this one person. So one year, this golf tournament, I'm there and this person's there. And, we had known each other for a long, long time, since the beginning of my career. I call them over and everything stops. Like there's people around and everybody stopped what they were doing because they all knew the history. And so they're like going, oh shit, like this is going down. So I call him over. He comes over. And I said to him basically this: I do not agree with the decision that you made, years ago, that basically let me go. However, I do also acknowledge that I gave you some of that rope to hang me with, and you chose to do that. I don't agree with it, but I'm letting it go. And I thanked him. I said, I want to thank you for letting me go, because I now know that if he didn't let me go and I kept going in that occupation, I don't think I would be walking on the earth right now. I think I would have continued to get worse. My family would have left. And I don't know if I would still be around. So I thanked him. I said, thank you for letting me go. Best thing that happened to me. even though I didn't see it at the time. And I also told him, I said, if you ever need any support, any help, mental health help or support, you reach out to me and I will find you resources. And I left it at that. And he said, thank you. He said, thank you very much, and that he struggles at times too. And I acknowledge that. And then we went our separate ways. And that whole issue went with it. I let it go. And that was a big turning point for me.
The interesting thing is in my mind, I mean, these are very advanced ways of finally getting through healing and gaining the acceptance that you need to gain. But you are a hero, Sean, for yourself.
Yeah, maybe.
This is very hard stuff to be able to face that and handle it the way you did.
Well, I had to. I didn't want to. Let's be honest, and a lot of the stuff I talk about right now is this theme, right? The big theme of Uptalk is own your growth. And what that means is that we have to take responsibility for our own wellness, and we have to do the hard work. The things you read out there and the memes that you see that it gets easier, it does not get easier. Every day is hard. Every day you have good days, great days, and some bad days, but every day is hard in that you have to make the choices that are necessary for your wellness. And most of the time, we don't do that. We take shortcuts. We don't want to do the hard work. We don't want to do the hard thing. I didn't want to have that hard conversation. I didn't want to do that, but I knew that if I didn't do that, I would never let it go and I would never grow. It's all about, really is no more complicated than doing the hard work every day. And it sounds hard, but all of us know that throughout our day, many times a day, we are presented with choices. Many micro choices that we make each day. And I think we don't give them enough thought most of the time because we're so busy, maybe. But if we thought about, okay, I have this choice, should I do this or should I do this? And choose the wellness path, at least most of the time, I think we'd be a lot better off. But we don't want to do that. We want to blame other people. My psychologist, I'm not connecting with my psychologist, which is a real thing, by the way. And if you don't, you should be okay to move on and try another one. But I think that sometimes we're too quick to make that excuse when really what's happening is that psychologist is giving us the hard work now, is giving us homework that we don't like, that's making us uncomfortable. And so we just stop doing it when we don't realize that, growth does not lie in comfort, right? Discomfort is where you grow. And again, we're just not tooled to like that, if that makes sense.
We're wired to seek out comfort on so many levels. We will steer away from discomfort 10 times out of 10. But you're right. You recognize that the very real thing that you needed to do most in your healing journey was embrace the other way that you would never go. And you just kept taking that turn. You would go to the golf tournament. You would not socially isolate. You would go and talk to that former boss or coworker, colleague that had to let you go. And you would approach the situation from gratitude instead of anger or hatred or resentment or whatever, guilt, whatever the case is. And you forged a path for yourself forward because you knew that if it went any other way, it wouldn't go well because you had done it that way before. And Sean, I'm right there with you. I've done it so many ways wrong in the past that I now know which way not to turn. So anytime I get hit with that comfort or discomfort opportunity of left or right, if comfort goes left, I automatically go, no, sorry, I have to go right.
Yeah, I kind of made a joke about this in some episodes, but I started doing the opposite of what my brain told me to do. At first, I would always do the opposite, and things tended to go much better because my brain would tell me, "Hey, you had a good day yesterday. Let's take today off. Let's order up some food. Let's get some Netflix going. Let's just hunker in and be all comfortable for the day. My brain would tell me that. I have to shut it down. I have to tell my brain to shut up. No, we're doing this. And it's not because I want to do it. It's just because I know I have to do it in order to be better. And I just think that like I said, we rely on our psychologists to save us. We rely on our families to save us. Oh, they're not supporting me enough, or they're not loving enough, or our employer didn't do enough, or the government doesn't do enough. It's time to shut up. Like, PTSD was not the years of service trophy that I wanted to get at the end of my career, but it's what I got. I embrace it. It's mine. I earned every bit of that through the work that I did. But now it's my responsibility, because I'm aware of these things and how PTSD works and all this stuff. It's my responsibility to put myself in the best position I can be. It's nobody else's at all. You have to save yourself. You have to want to save yourself before anything else can happen.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah. There's only one path. There's no other path. There's no shortcut. There's no pill. There's no diet. There's no one modality of therapy that, boom, is going to fix it and you're great forever. All those things work. All the wellness things such as dieting, exercise, therapy, they all will work as long as you're willing to put in your part. And we often don't do that.
Yeah, and the one thing I found with my own wellness routine was it was so incredibly simple. Like, really, when you boil it down, it's, sprinkle a little bit of me time in there, and that me time might boil down to doing breath work, going for a walk, doing a meditation session, doing yoga. You're going to definitely want to do some physical exercise as well. You're going to work out. You need to eat well. You need to make sure you're getting proper sleep, the right amount of water, all these different things, all very simple things. But if you don't do that, everything falls apart. Very quickly. Your mental health just starts to shift, and the negative cynicism, the PTSD that's there can just kind of come back and bite you. So I'm glad you've picked up on so many of these really important lessons that, and again, you self-taught yourself.
Yeah, I did. Just because I felt I had to. But yeah, totally did. I'm very grateful. Like, I have all these tools. Like, I've been telling people lately, like, I've learned all these tools from guests. I have an immense amount of tools in my toolbox for wellness that I can do. But they don't do any good if I don't use them. It doesn't do me any good to know they're there and not use them, which I've done many times. Have left them in the box and not used them, and have things not go well or get worse.
I don't even put my tools back, Sean.
Yeah.
I don't close my toolbox anymore. I don't even put them back. I just leave them out, because literally that's the analogy you have to take with PTSD is you always have to be doing something in order to continue to grow in PTSD. I don't know if this effort ever needs to stop or what the case is, but I don't think so either.
I think this is it. But I don't think, regardless of PTSD, I think is what we're supposed to be doing anyway. I think we're supposed to be, doing wellness routines, whether we're having problems or not. Like, I think they lead to good habits. They lead to being a better human. Some people are lucky. Lucky, and what I mean by that is they don't do these things, but for some reason they seem to get by, or they seem to have an okay life. Which really I would caution that, because a lot of people we're really good at hiding things. We can make things look good, but really we're falling apart on the inside. So you never really know, how someone's life is, even though it looks a certain way. But the work doesn't change. I think we need to do this. That's the lesson, is that having a good life, having holistic wellness and, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual wellness takes work. It doesn't just happen. It takes work every day. And that's how you do it. Like, that's just the way it works. right? I'm a Star Wars fan, huge fanatic, and love The Mandalorian. This is the way. This is the only way. This is how it works.
When I first started going through PTSD and then having to realize that I was going to need to leave the Mounties, like this was a decision that I went through on my own.
Yeah.
And again, there was an element of lack of support there from the Mounties. And that was kind of the moment where I finally said, okay, if you're not going to support me, I can't continue to stay in this environment. So I will go and get my support where I need to get my support so I can heal. But unfortunately, we're done here. Like this is the journey. 14 years is over for me. Now, one of the interesting things for Mounties is when you seek out a medical retirement and you go to leave, you can actually then tap into disability. Now, they set you up with disability for 2 years so you can kind of heal and get your life back together and deal with some of the trauma and the PTSD, whatever happened. But then you can flip over into long-term disability. And a lot of Mounties end up doing this. And one thing you touched on that I think is really, really important for me and for you too, is I recognized very early on that if I chose to take the olive branch of staying on disability forever, I would never hit the post-traumatic growth that I needed in my life. So I said, thank you for the disability, the 2 years, the support you've given me so that I can transition into something different. But the end of that road, I am done.
Right.
Because I have to be.
Yeah.
And that's also a beautiful thing too in post-traumatic stress, that you have to recognize wherever that discomfort is. And like you said too, the brain is a very tricky thing, especially with PTSD, because it'll always throw you these curveballs of do this, do that, do this, do that. And they're never going to aid in your growth because it's not designed to do that.
No.
And in order to really kind of push yourself and edge yourself forward, I too have had to recognize that I need to embrace discomfort. And also, anytime my brain tells me do this first, like the first idea that comes in my head, I'm always like, I'm not doing that, right? I'm not going to go sit and veg for a day and watch TV or whatever. And mind you, I can't anymore because I have 3 kids. A new one just came 3 months ago.
Yeah, it's never going to happen again for you. Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure I'm heading out to pasture now. But I love how you look at all of this, and I love how you look at post-traumatic growth. One thing I wanted to come back to was you touched on how you recognized that after you had left and you started to heal, that you actually looked back at the old former self, the self that you thought was a rock star. And you had a very different perspective now. Now that perspective, how did that blend into how you saw your relationship with your partner, your wife, your children, and what did that do for you when you actually really saw the reality of it and potentially looked at facing the potential loss of losing them?
Oh yeah, and listen. It's something that we're still struggling with today as a family. Just today before this podcast, we were talking about an issue and I blew it way out of proportion. I went like totally crazy and about it. And, and some apologies were given and some moral will be given after this. But I'm just telling you that to show you that like every day, if you're not on top of it every day, little things can happen. Mistakes can happen. I mean, I look back on it now and you ask me how I feel. I feel grateful. I'm grateful because they're still here and they should not be. And I've told them that. I was horrible to my wife. Was not a good partner. Was not present. And same for my daughter. I have a daughter who's 19 now. She's, saw a lot of angry eruptions from me that were scary for her when she was little, right? Scary for her now when she thinks about it. Many times like that when I didn't know what was going on, I was terrified of what was going on in my own head, didn't know what to do, and just was an emotional roller coaster. For years and years, they had to deal with, protect themselves from, and try to figure out the absolute worst version of me that I could have ever imagined. So how I feel when looking back at that is, again, more guilt. So that's mainly what I deal with now. What gives me problems now is guilt, because I see their faces and I see things and I'm reminded of how bad I was, and I feel guilty about it. But here's the thing, that's not going to fucking help. Feeling guilty about it is not going to help it. If you have more stuff to learn from it, do that. Learn whatever you can from those things and then put them away. Let them go, because there's no more help they're going to give you. This guilt isn't doing anything for you. It doesn't do me any good to haul around all this guilt, but I do have it. And I can't say that I don't. And I deal with it every day. But grateful is how I feel, because they should not be here. My wife should have left. 100% should have been gone. But she's not. And, no matter how good a day that we're having as a family or a bad day, they're still here, which means that we're still working on it. We're still trying, right? It's not easy. It's hard. Again, it's just one of those things every day that's hard, but it's worth it.
It's entirely worth it. And you're right. I love how you approach this with the realism that actually takes place in a family. I think a lot of times we look at social media and we see these families that are, thriving, and they present as, happy 24/7. Most families don't encompass that. I would say probably 99, 100% of families aren't designed that way. There's a very real human experience that happens in the family. And then you throw in PTSD in the mix and things get very complicated, like you said, about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And, your wife
makes it impossible.
Your wife comes to you and says, hey, there's an issue with the garbage can. And all of a sudden you're taken to a completely different place of, the world's on fire. How do we save this? And all you needed to do was go and grab a garbage bag. Right. Yeah. I don't know how many times I've been in that position where I've literally got to talk the mind into, because, and I'm sure you understand this too, like with PTSD has this horrible biological habit too, to make the amygdala grow. The amygdala, once you actually sit with PTSD and you're in a traumatic environment for long enough, your amygdala can actually grow and increase in size. So that means that it's getting stronger. It's almost like a muscle, right? If you work your muscle long enough, it's going to grow and get stronger. So it's,
it served its purpose. Back when we were cavemen, we needed that amygdala as big as possible to fire up so that we wouldn't get eaten, like real threats. There's a reason why it's there. And it does help us out, obviously, in certain career paths, to have that, to be able to identify a threat and to be able to take care of it. But for the most part, in our normal daily lives, it creates more of a problem than it does help.
I totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah. Absolutely agree 100%. Now for you, you paint a real picture as to where you are. You've been done with serving your community for quite some time. You've gone on, you've found success with your podcast. You've now been doing this for about 6 years. You have amazing episodes. There obviously is the longevity there. You're going to continue going. You have the sponsorship. The podcast itself, what has the podcast done for you outside of giving you the tools that you need in order to now kind of better understand why you were the way you were? What is it doing now for you?
Yeah. Well, it forces me to talk to people because I don't like peopling a whole lot. I have that whole little bit of social anxiety that came along with all of this, that I just don't want to be around people a whole bunch. So it forces me to do that. And it forces me to constantly meet people that I didn't know before, which I'm grateful for. It's good for me. I always feel great afterwards. So it forces me to socialize, number one. And it is a reminder of me because of the guests that I've had on and maybe some messages that I get back from people who have listened. It reminds me that I'm not alone. That's one of the biggest mind fucks that our brain will send us, is that we're alone, that no one knows what we're going through, that no one has ever been through anything like this. And, you're all by yourself. You're special in that you're the only one who's ever had trauma, right? It's bullshit, right? But that's how we feel alone. So it's a reminder that I'm not alone. And for me, it's another way to serve. So and that's a big problem, a big obstacle, I should say, that people have who have been in the service or in first response and now are out, is trying to find another way to serve. So for me, this is my other way to serve. If I can help anybody, or if anybody listens to me rambling and it helps them and they get something out of it and it makes their day better, or makes them decide to go a different path or to do something differently, or just makes them realize that they're not alone, because they're not. We're like I say that we're a small community of billions of people, like the way we are with social media now, and be able to connect to people so quickly. We really are a small community. It's helped me, to realize that. It's put routine in my life. So we're in season 7 right now, and it's helped me maintain a routine, which has always been a problem. Organizational skills, because guess where they live? In the prefrontal cortex, which is great when it's not online most of the time. But so routine has been a problem, and that's been a routine in my life, something solid in my life that I now can say that I've done consistently for a long period of time, which is a good accomplishment, and I feel proud of for me. But really, it's just what the big motivation for me now is to serve others, and it's just another way for me to serve, another way for me to be a part of that community without being right in it, if that makes sense.
Same reason I'm here as well, Sean.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, for sure.
The interesting thing is when I went to rehab in 2019, I was so shut down, and I was dealing with addiction and not willing to admit that I was dealing with addiction at the same breath. And I was there kind of under the ruse of let's deal with the trauma and get better. In hopes of not having to address the conversation around addiction, and my addiction at the time, which was with medical cannabis, which did help, but I mean, a whole different topic unto itself.
Right.
But my therapist in that moment, and I've said this many, many times on my podcast, he looked at me and said, Nate, you are so shut down. You aren't telling me anything about yourself. The only way you are going to heal is if you get out and you tell anyone in the world your story, and you can do it with the authenticity that needs to be there, and the vulnerability that needs to be there. And that's the only time that you're going to heal. And I remember in that moment when I first heard that, and I was kind of like, there's no way that telling my story is going to be the thing that sets me free. Not a chance, right? And sure enough, as I start to work through rehab and I do this 6 weeks, I'm starting to feel pretty good in sobriety. And then I come home and I'm like, what am I going to do? And I relapsed because of COVID and social isolation. And that was a hard time too for all of us, right? And then all of a sudden, I'm kind of coming out of addiction again, and really starting to think about, okay, how do I need to do this differently? Because I can't keep doing this, right? Because much like you, I had my second child was here, my son, and I was starting to fall back into addiction, and I knew I'd lose it all. So I had to kind of finally put a stake down in the ground and finally say, okay, this is where I stand, and I need to start talking. And that's kind of where I began. I began on TikTok. I talked for a year on TikTok in the weeds, just connecting with other people. And same thing. Everybody was, they're like, wow, like I go through the same stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And you start to connect, and then all of a sudden it blossomed into eventually, you know, recognizing that this is a very valid conversation to have about your struggle and connecting with others and building a community of people that, you know, go through stuff in life, and we all do. And the healing that comes from podcasting is absolutely insane, because you connect with so many different people who just want to be here and just tell their story, right down to the ugly parts, the beautiful parts, you know, the parts that make up this whole experience of life. And I really want to applaud you for being that person. I mean, there's been so many guests that have come on my show. I'm only in season 2, but the love that I have for people, and especially men who have struggled and they're trying to get better at being a better father, more connected, more emotional, a better husband, whatever the case is, they're on this self-growth. I've got a really big soft spot for that because I think I've seen so many men go down, that wrong path in life where they don't turn out okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we don't like to talk about emotions. It is stereotypical to say, but it is prevalent with males that we don't like to talk about emotions. We just
We
want to
also
be.
don't like to feel them.
No, we don't want to. We don't want anything to do with them. We want to be capital S stoic, right? And it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work long term, especially if you want to be with other people. If you want a family, it's just not going to go well. You just can't. You can't cling to it. You can't keep expecting a different outcome when you're not willing to change anything. Like, it does not work. And you have to be able to be honest with yourself enough to call yourself out on your own bullshit and to tell yourself that you're being ridiculous. But you also need to counterbalance that with being kind to yourself. We're also really hard on ourselves, more hard than we should be. We need to talk to ourselves like we're talking to our best friend. Talk to ourselves like that, which we rarely do. And it's hard to do and hard to get in the habit of. But it's that cross balance of calling ourselves out and also being kind to ourselves.
Firm and fair. Yeah. Absolutely. This is a very interesting episode for me because normally with season 2, we dive deep into trauma and we dive deep into podcast, but we've kind of taken a much more philosophical approach and kind of the whole, what is PTSD and steered away from it and kind of loosely talked about the periphery of your life and kind of where things were good and not good. And I actually have to say, I really enjoyed this episode with you because it shone a light on a new area. And I think it's really good to always kind of approach each connection moment with someone unscripted and just go with it because, and you suffer from this as well. We always think that our podcast episodes, we always try to frame them in such a way that we think that we're going to be able to give the right message to people. And 9 times out of 10, we're actually limiting the conversation or the connection that can stem from that place, right? So this completely unscripted. I mean, all of them are unscripted, but I've actually kind of stepped back a bit from focusing on PTSD and said, let's just connect with Sean and see what his perspective is about PTSD, how it impacted his life, what it's taught, what podcasting has taught him, and where you're at now. 2 hats that I'm going to wear right now, obviously, is the PTSD hat. And I'm going to ask you a question about what you know now and everything that you've been through. For the person that's in the despair, the depression, the sadness, the loneliness, the trauma, is suffering, maybe doesn't know they're suffering, or maybe does. What's your one message of hope for that person?
It's like this. I've said this a couple times. If I break my arm and I'm wearing a cast, or if you see someone who's broken their arm and they're wearing a cast, you would not expect them to be able to throw a ball or to, bear their weight with that arm or really do anything else with that arm, really. Nothing. Right? For the length of time that it's going to take to heal. Yet, for some reason, we will automatically 100% of the time believe what an injured brain tells us. We don't even question it. So the biggest thing I've learned, and I use this because I struggle a lot, and there's still times where I'm sitting there, everything's dark, I feel like I'm alone, I feel like there's no path out, I don't see a door, I don't see a window. Despair, right? I've had that. I still have those days. You have to understand where the message is coming from. The message is coming from an injured brain. You have to manage that. You have to tell yourself, oh, wait a minute. It's giving me bad information because it's a little off right now. So don't believe anything it's telling you. And if that means just sitting there, what I tend to do now is if I'm really sad or depressed is to acknowledge it. It's here, and to let it do its thing and let it move on. I don't connect with it. I don't put too much into it. I don't read too much into it or anything like that. I just observe it. Allow the emotion to come. It will pass, and then you'll start getting better messages. That's really hard to do when you're in the middle of it. Except that going into it when you're well, you have to understand that you're going to do this when things aren't good. You're going to keep telling yourself you're not by yourself. You're not alone. You have the support of millions of people who are waiting to help you, who are waiting to show you resources. Yes, it takes a little bit of work to find them, and you may have to try a couple different things before you find out what works for you. But it's there. It's 100% there and available.
Thank you for joining us on Season 2. If you are a first responder with an incredible story into post-traumatic stress, please reach out and connect with myself. Season 2 is based on your story. And if you want to step up to the plate and share your story with the world, I would be more than honored to help you do that. Thank you for your continued support with this project, and thank you for tuning in today.